just to widen it out slightly, in the Financial Times, the president of Legia Warsaw, the Polish team, Dariusz Mioduski, said, Adam, the system in European football is broken. May not be broken in England for the time being, but even there it will lead to something which is unsustainable. England is just at the top of the pyramid and it's making the problem most visible. But it's the same situation in Italy, Spain, France, and Germany. Two-part question then. Do you agree with him? Is the system in European football broken? Or is it just unsustainable financially?
Depends who you are. I don't like. I'm not sure it's broken per se, because if you look at COVID, for example, remember when COVID first happened, we were just told all these clubs are going to go out of business. That was, all the stress signals were clubs are going to go out of business. It's simply not happened. It's not happened. So, and if you say the worst possible thing that could happen to a sport is not being able to play sport, not being able to have fans in stadiums, reduced broadcast as a result of that, like football kind of got through it. Now it got through it to differing extents. A lot of leagues around Europe are still recovering from that, whereas English football just hasn't really been affected. And I was thinking about this yesterday in terms of why has that been the case, and it's probably to a large extent English football has benefited from a lack of regulation for a really long time, whether that's about who owns clubs, whether that's about the ease of building stadiums maybe compared to Italy, or improving stadiums. German football obviously having the 50+1 model, which would have made some of the takeovers we've seen in English football very difficult in Germany. La Liga having those salary cap restrictions that English football hasn't quite gone for. Okay, there's financial fair play, but it's nowhere near as severe as what we've seen in La Liga. And I think that's kind of a lot of it. And then I was thinking, what could be the thing that reins it back in? What could rein back English football? And I was thinking, could it be a scandal? Could it be something like, I don't know, for example, it's turning out that one of the most successful clubs from the last 20 years, Matt's laughing because he thinks I'm about to say Manchester City. I was actually going to say one of the most successful clubs from the last 20 years, having a sanctioned mate of Putin was running the club. And that's had zero impact on the success of English football. And if anything, has only made it more marketable and interesting because of what's happened next at Chelsea. Then could there be a scandal where a team possibly gets stripped of titles, as we may see with Manchester City in the worst case scenario for them? But even then, I'm not really sure. Could it be something like the most popular club in England not winning the Premier League for a decade, Manchester United? That's not had the impact. So I can understand why all these clubs around Europe are looking at the Premier League and just thinking, well, I don't know how we're ever going to catch up.
Matt?
Well, I agree. I mean, so much of what A22 are doing at the moment is pointing out some of these very obvious issues. And there is a, bloody hell, the Premier League are doing rather well, aren't they? Mm. What do we do about that? Now,
but they're not doing rather well. And look, I've been a real critic of the Premier League at times, and some seasons it has been absolutely dreadful as the Premier League. And you know what's going to happen before, but it has, hasn't it, over the many years that we have covered the Premier League. But the Premier League is doing rather well at the moment, obviously commercially, but it's also doing rather well in what we call competitive balance. I mean, promoted teams have come up and have held their own in the main, with the exception of Bournemouth. You've got a title race with a club that hasn't been in the title race for God knows how long, with other sides punching way above their weight inside the top half. I'm not the biggest cheerleader at times, but credit where credit's. It's a great league at the moment.
Well, I think you're right. Credit where credit's due. Now, a few years ago, whenever people sort of made these observations about average wage bills, median wage bills, spend in a certain transfer window, the fact that the Premier League had sort of nudged ahead of La Liga in the European coefficients and now was the strongest league. We had a few years where we had a number of Premier League semi-finalists, a couple of all Premier League finals. We've had this debate before. And when I spoke to people in Liga, Bundesliga, the answer was nearly always, fair play. it would be unsporting of us to bitch and moan about this, right? We need to do better. What are the Premier League good at? Okay, they're really slick the way they market. They've created a sort of perception of competitive balance, which hasn't always been there, but the perception has. Some of their kind of side content, so things like Ted Lasso, all these other sort of, Sun Until I Die, which I know isn't necessarily Premier League, but the point is that they are good at creating this story and narrative. They sort of bring people in all the time. Their international TV deals, were clearly good, and how they did that. Now, English language is important, but I don't think we did this a few weeks ago, didn't we? I said I don't think it's the only reason you could say that the Premier League has an advantage over the others, because Spanish is a very widely spoken language in countries that care more about football, frankly, than some of the places that speak a lot of English. So the Premier League, for whatever reason, has had this lead for a while. What has changed in the last year or so is the other leagues have all really struggled to come out of COVID. Their domestic deals are flat, if not going backwards, some of them edging backwards, and they just have struggled to make their product exciting and compelling to overseas broadcasters. And that might be because an overseas broadcaster says, all right, I'm going to put my time, effort and money into one overseas football league, right? Because I've got my own one, right? I'm going to do one other. It's going to be the Premier League at the moment, because, and that is just capitalism, right? We go, the thing that's best gets a lot more than the thing that's second, third and fourth, even though they might only be a little bit better. Now, at the moment, all these things are happening at the same time, and everybody else is really, really, really down. And I'll just go back to that. You mentioned Darius Midowski, who won't mean much to our listeners. I'm just going to put some context around him. I thought that quote was really, really interesting. He's one of the most reasonable voices in European sport. He runs the biggest team in Poland. Sometimes they do well in Europe, sometimes they don't. And it makes or breaks their season. Absolutely makes or breaks their season. He is that classic guy of more European football changes the picture for his team completely. He's also a very senior member at the European Club Association. European Club Association are very close to UEFA. They are firmly aligned behind the Swiss model. They were firmly aligned behind no to the Super League. That quote is him saying, the system's broken. I thought he was part of the solution. I thought he was, I thought that quote was really, really interesting because of the guy who said it.
But he must be looking at that just from the sustainability and financial point of view. I mean, he mentions sustainability in that quote, Matt. So he must be. When he talks about the English being at the top of that pyramid, that must be from the clubs can't keep spending like this. The money won't keep rolling in like this forever. I'm guessing that's what he's talking about.
I think so. But he's. And that's fine. He can have an opinion about the sustainability of Chelsea spending. Chelsea will, if we bring them in, they'll say, no, we know completely what we're doing. We're fine, right? We're investing, right? That's what it's called. We're investing. I just think the context of the moment, this last week, the conversation has been about the Premier League, reigning the Premier League, and what do we do about the Premier League? This current 2.0, this new iteration of the European Super League feels incredibly defensive to me. It feels, you lot, consonant, what are we going to do? Because the Premier League are taking over.
Are they wanting to? Do you think, Adam, that everybody wants? Well, everybody's lumped everybody in together. But the people that want to rein in the Premier League are wanting to rein the Premier League in from a talent drain perspective. So they don't want the best players in La Liga joining the 14th place team in the Premier League. Is that what we're talking about with reining in? Because it's not like Premier League teams are winning the Champions League every year or are winning the Europa League every year. And yes, there are 4 Premier League teams in the last 16 of the Champions League, but there are 4 German teams in the last 16 of the Champions League. There are 3 Italian teams in the last 16 of the Champions League. It's not like there are 4 English and then just 1 from every other country. So when they talk about reining in, is it from a talent drain perspective?
I think it's a little bit of that pride about the talent drain, but I think it's more about what they're able to spend and what they're able to pay people, and just that general feeling of, can we compete on an equal footing? Do we perceive ourselves to be equal? Why should we, as, I don't know, Sevilla, be in a weaker financial position than a Bournemouth or Nottingham Forest? I think there's a lot of ego attached to that, and I do understand that.